Cause and the Effect community, I am blessed to be joined by Dr. Frank Scalambrino, philosopher, the first full-time philosopher on the podcast. Dr. Scalambrino, how are you doing, my friend?
Very good, Scott. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be on here with you.
Guys, I'm sorry because Frank is just ready to go with all his beautiful background and the purple. I'm going to start working on it. And Frank's launching his new podcast channel. I'm going to put the notes in that whenever he has that all set up. We will get that going. Today, we are talking about Frank totally just kind of going through. We're throwing some ideas, and he picked authenticity, which I could not. I'm surprised I haven't done one yet, and I think you're the perfect person to discuss this. Now, let's start with I want to start with your journey first, Frank. Tell everybody a little bit about yourself and like where this whole philosopher journey started. Was this something like initially you thought you would be doing at the age of 14 or 15?
Not at all. Not at all. Yeah, I, I think my my father was really just kind of putting in my mind that I should just play football. So I think I was interested in sports and sports only. Um, and I ended up going to Kenyon College, and at Kenyon College, I came into contact with philosophy. And it's interesting because I really was sort of convinced for the longest time that I was going to be a psychologist. That's all I don't know. Well, really, I got it in my mind by reading Sigmund Freud, but that's a whole nother avenue. But so I got it in my mind that I was going to be a psychologist. I went to Kenyon College in Ohio to study psychology. And while I was there, my friends kept telling me, you got to take some philosophy classes. They had taken a couple philosophy classes or even just their first philosophy class. And they said, we just think that this is right up your alley. You really need to take a philosophy class. So I took a philosophy class and I fell in love with it, but it was too late. I would have had to stay longer to double major. So I just minored in philosophy. And then I got out of Kenyon College and started to work in mental health. So I was doing a lot of crisis suicide intervention and prevention work, working the midnight shift on the weekend. So I got to see a lot of action. And I was also working in an emergency room as a nursing assistant at the time. So lots of the emergency room that I was working in was also actually a trauma center. So, around a lot of crisis, around a lot of trauma. And let's see. Then because I was working the midnight shift on the weekends, I was always interacting with the chemical dependency counselors that were admitting people to the detox units. And so they just kept telling me that they really wanted me to come over and be a chemical dependency counselor. So I went over, I started working as a chemical dependency counselor. I would still work on the weekends every once in a while, afternoon shifts, whatever, at the crisis center. And in Ohio, I was in Ohio still. Ohio has this system of basically it's like government oversight. So they have like an agency that just makes sure that people are providing services that are being paid for with tax dollars, that those services are being provided in the best possible way, right? So that agency contacted me and they said, we've been following your work for a few years now, and we'd like for you to come over here and work for us. So I decided to work as an administrator then for a while. And during that period of time, it's, again, these stories can take forever, but during that period of time, I was really sort of overseeing and carefully watching the way that the crisis center that I had been previously working at, that they were using some of their bed days is the way that they would refer to it. Basically, when you send somebody to the hospital, there's only the community only has so much money to pay for mental health services. So so the idea is that if you can be more efficient at doing that, then that's better for everybody. So during that process, some things happened that basically there was talk that they wanted to set up a new crisis center. They wanted to start a new crisis center. So I was approached and asked if I thought that I could do that. And so I said, well, I've been watching I've worked it at every level. I've been watching this for years. I think I can do it. So then I set up a crisis center, and I was the director of that crisis center. I ran it for a couple years, and at that point, then during this process, I was told by the government oversight agency that I needed to have a master's degree. So, but they never told me what I needed to have the master's degree in. I think afterward they kind of, wished that they had, but so I said, so I went off and I got a master's degree in philosophy, which, was sort of my first love anyway. And then my philosophy professors just kept encouraging me. I was actually working on a second master's degree to have a license in as a mental health therapist, an LPC, is what it's called in Ohio. And but my philosophy professors kept telling me, just go get your PhD in philosophy. If you want to be a philosophy professor, then that's what you should do. Long story short, I'm almost done. Is that it was interesting because I was working as the director, and I get contacted by the professors at the university, and they asked me if I would teach an introduction to philosophy class for them. And I had no intention of teaching philosophy courses, right? Like I got the master's degree because I loved philosophy, and I figured I would just keep running this crisis center, until I'd retire or something. But they told me this story. They said, there were like, I don't know, 37 students, and the guy who was going to teach the class backed out at the last minute. And so if you don't teach this class for us, then we're going to have to cancel on all these students. And so I basically decided to teach this class as kind of like a favor to these professors that I had been working with and that I really liked. But then when I got in the classroom, I just absolutely fell in love with it. So then I, between that experience and then talking to those professors, they said, you should go get your PhD. So went back to school. I went to Duquesne University in Pittsburgh, got my PhD, and just started teaching with it. I've taught in a lot of places. I taught in Pittsburgh. I taught multiple places in Ohio, John Carroll, Kent State, Akron. Taught in downtown Chicago at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, and I taught in Texas at the University of Dallas. So I came back from Texas. I was a visiting professor in Dallas. I came back from Texas, was in Ohio for a little bit, and I thought, you know what? I've never gone west. I had some real draw, some real pull toward Colorado and Colorado Springs. So I've been in Colorado Springs for almost 4 years now, and I've been writing all along the way. Ever since I finished my dissertation, I kind of got the writing bug. I got really excited about it, and so I'm writing my 10th book right now. Wow. With a good friend of mine, Dr. Jason Pittman. We have the title is a work in progress, but at this point, basically it's about simulation theory, and so we're pretty excited about it. We've essentially got an entire draft of the book done at this point, and we've been talking about this for probably about 7 years, working on this for about 7 years, but in the background. But so I'm hoping that we can finish that and get it out before the end of 2022, but we'll see.
Beautiful,
so that's it,
man.
There it is.
That's it, Frank.
Yeah.
That's all you
that's
got?
it. That's it. That's
no,
all.
dude, that's great. No, and I love hearing the journey because similar to you, if you met me when I was in high school, signed my letter of intent to play football at Rutgers University. I was, 260 pounds. I ready to kill people. Blew out my ACL, MCL, meniscus, the whole thing. So I had to find these different paths. And it's so interesting that you found philosophy kind of after psychology, because I always thought those two go hand in hand. And my question for you is, how has philosophy changed how you see the world, not only through a totality, but also from a psychological lens? And then on top of that, what do you say to the people that say, why are you studying philosophy? Because for me, I've never found books more interesting than philosophical books. It's the only thing in my life I could just not put down. And I just think there's something there for me, at least. And I'm like 2 or 3 years in the journey. I'm loving it. A lot of questions thrown at you, Frank.
Awesome. That's awesome, Scott. And I just want to say one more time, thank you so much. I listened to some of your other podcast episodes. I'm looking forward to listening to more of them. And I really dig your vibe. I really like what you got going on here. I really am happy that you're doing what you're doing. So thank you, brother. Much love coming from Colorado for you.
Let's go.
So, let's see. I think that for me, as I was going through philosophy, it really was like putting a puzzle together, because I couldn't find I mean, there was no one who could just tell me the answer, right? But every once in a while I would hear something or I would read something, and I just really felt like I just felt like it was a part of the answer to a question that I really didn't even know how to formulate, you know. And so I felt like I mean, in the beginning, long periods of time would go before I would, you know, so to speak, find another puzzle piece that was fitting into this puzzle. But I think that if I could just put it in shorthand now, you know, after all this time and all this work, I would say that really I'm an existentialist, right? And that I had been trying to figure out what is existence, like you know, what does it mean to exist, and how can I get a better understanding of what it is that I'm experiencing simply by existing.
Yeah, man. For me, it's like, not, I don't want to say enlightenment because we get too into that, but like it's almost like the enlightenment of our human condition. And
Yeah.
it's like showing me that there's depths to your mind, there's depths to your consciousness, there's depths to yourself that like I would never even imagine. Like how you were saying, it's like you can't just read one book and like, oh right, I read I read one philosophy book, I'm here. It's like piecing together this fun journey that you're in, like, oh, I remember this from this book, or this from Alan Watson, this that. And it's just like a beautiful essence. And now to get us to the main topic here of authenticity,
Mm-hmm.
how much, because this is like my life's purpose since I turned 28, 29, is like I want to be the truest, most authentic version of myself. How has this process been for you? I'm a big young guy, individuation process, all that stuff. How has this authentic
Awesome.
life of Frank looked? Because it seems like you're doing it. You're writing, you're doing you know, the YouTube channel. How has this looked for you?
You know, I think that, so the way I'm hearing that question is kind of twofold for me. So on the one hand, I would say, and by the way, I love Jung, love this stuff. But so on the one hand, I would say that it was the question of how do you spend time, you know, like my relationship with time. And you know, I know some people who have really gone overboard with that, but I feel like that really is the entry point in terms of just trying to get a grip on yourself, really, right? And so the idea is that you know, you would start to ask yourself questions like, am I spending my time in a way that I really don't want to be spending my time, right? Or let me put it in a more goal-oriented direction. It's like if I have told myself, right, if I have committed myself to a goal, and then I find that I'm not able to reach that goal, why is that, right? And it's very difficult, I feel, to answer that question if you're just kind of just like randomly looking at things, right? And so the sort of ground level is to just ask yourself, well, what am I doing with my time? And then so that, I think that was a big part of it. But when you first start to see this, in my opinion, for me at least, when I first start to look at how I'm spending my time, there really was it's a challenge in the sense, because, you know, you have to be able, you know, nowadays they talk about FOMO or something like this, right? So the idea is that, you know, you've got to be able to the existentialists refer to something called opportunity cost, right?
Yes.
And so the idea is that you've got to be willing to say that I realize that by spending this next hour doing X, I can't spend this next hour doing Y, you know. And I think that when you start to get used to that process, and you start to just accept that you are sacrificing some things, right, and just accept that it's just not possible to move forward without sacrificing some things, then that whole process becomes more efficient. It becomes easier, I think, in some ways. So that
Absolutely.
was, yeah, so that was in terms of time. Yeah.
No, and that I kind of made that same entry point with self-development, being more productive, hitting the goals. And
Mhm.
what got me was I think it was Jordan Peterson got me like monetizing an hour. So how much do you make in an hour at work? You know, a couple $100, whatever. and I was monetizing that on a week. I was like, holy shit, you're wasting 4, 5, 6 hours a day doing nothing useful by my own standards. That's the fun part of this, right? You give it the
Yeah.
meaning that you have.
Yeah.
And when
Yeah.
you start
That's
looking at it
excellent.
that way, it becomes something of like an eye opener. Now, for me, I'm probably like one of your friends. I went the other way. I kind of got so honed in between a podcast, running a business, and then I'm doing stand up comedy at night. I
Oh,
kind of
that's
let
awesome.
everything, I let everything go to the side, Frank. And I was more like, oh, I forgot about family. I forgot about commitments. Like, how do you set up your day? Is it like setting a schedule on Sundays and just following through? Because, making time for the family, all that stuff. What does that look like?
Well, I tell you, so yeah. So right, so presently I'm not teaching, and there was a period of time when I was teaching so much. I think that oh, I can't even off the top of my head even remember how many courses I was teaching at a time. But I feel like and Plato talks about this in the Republic. I think that I went from, and I imagine this was a part of the motivation, or maybe you found this in your heart when you were sort of walking that path as well, and that is that this idea of competition, right, and setting goals and sort of competing with yourself, really. And so I feel like at first I was so competitive, even with myself. I mean, I think more so with myself than anyone else. That I was just, grinding. I was just cranking. Um, Nowadays, so yeah, nowadays, I'm actually managing a property out here in Colorado Springs,
Nice.
that people come out. They come out when they're vacationing, and I really like. We call it Tesla's Cottage, because I guess when Tesla was out here, he actually used to hang out with the people who built this property. So
Oh,
he's been on the property. There's pictures of him on the property, and so anyway, so we refer to it as Tesla's Cottage. It's in Colorado Springs. If you'll forgive the little plug there. Not that it needs a
oh,
plug though. I'm
yeah.
I'm
I
super
love that.
busy. Yeah. You should come out sometime and check it out.
Oh,
Um,
dude, I'm in, man. Don't be silly.
okay.
I'm coming.
Okay.
I'm
Okay.
I'm
Let's
supposed to
do
go to
it.
Colorado. I'm in, dude. I'm in.
Let's do it. Yeah. Colorado Springs is a really wonderful place. But so but what's excellent is that all the people who come out here are on vacation. So it's interesting how it's like, on a day-to-day basis, it's like it's difficult to have a bad day when all these other people, what I mean, everybody's
Yeah.
always celebrating, and when they're done celebrating, some new people show up and they're celebrating. So it's just like, so I've been trying to tap into the energy of that vibe of just like, wow, man, like they're having a great day, like I'm going to try to have a great day too. But and I love the work. I love the work. I love doing the philosophy. I love learning and putting these things together. So that's, I guess, to answer your question, that's what I've been trying to do, is just kind of tap into the heart of it, tap into the love of it. You know what I mean? And go with that as the motivation.
Yeah, man. I think for me too, similar. It was like you get too caught up in the. I'd look at things like black and white now, yin and yang, and the masculine and feminine. That doing is easy for a kid from Brooklyn who could talk, and I'm good at hitting these goals, right? With comedy, you got to do this and rip through. But that being, that stillness, that feminine energy was the issue for me. Finding peace is not the easiest thing for a guy like me. So I've been working on that, and all of a sudden you end up being more productive when you start like bringing that perfect balance together. For me, that's been like the whole sort of enlightenment of this thing. Like, you could have both. You don't have to be like, obviously you got to grind, you got to be efficient, but you could do incredible things while being in the stillness and keeping that spirituality like really close to you.
I think that's absolutely right. That's
Yeah.
absolutely right.
Now, we're going to start off the deep dive into authenticity with a little quote here from D.W. Winnicott I got for Frank. I hope he likes it. Poets, philosophers, and seers have always concerned themselves with the idea of a true self, and the betrayal of the self has been a typical example of the unacceptable. I'm going to read one more from you from the Gospel of Thomas. If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. And I will start there, Frank, and I will let you go wherever you want because you are the king of this stuff, and I'm just going to sit and listen.
Well, that is outstanding. Those are both great quotes. Great
Thank
quotes.
you, brother.
Um, so this idea of the self, and tied in with this idea of self-actualization, and so recently, actually it was in August, I I published a 2-volume set on existentialism. It's called "What is Existentialism?" The first volume is the history and principles, and the second volume is I think essential distinctions and conclusion. And anyway, one of the main pieces that I feel as though existentialism is up against is this idea of the Cartesian understanding of the self. And so the nice distinction here is the distinction between the subject and the self. And I've been trying to help folks out by pointing out to them that all this talk about the subject is the wrong path, but they, some people, I guess they just got the karma, they have to walk that path. But in either case, this idea of the self. So to my mind, there's and speaking directly to those quotes, you can understand this in terms of these principles of existentialism, and so authenticity is going to be one of these principles of existentialism. Yes. So if I can just kind of a broad context here, and
yes, please.
Then okay. So you can divide. Basically, there are 7 principles, and you can divide these principles into the constitutional principles and the actualization principles. And of course, authenticity is one of the actualization principles. So in terms of the constitutional principles, they are mystery, freedom, and mindness. And this is the idea that existence is always already yours, and that you are going to be responsible for your choices. The way that Sartre likes to refer to this is that, freedom is inescapable. That no one can make your choices for you, and even if you try to let somebody else make your choices, or even if you try to not choose, that still is a choice, of course. So the way that I see this in the broadest picture, or the most zoomed out picture, is in terms of transcendental philosophy. And Jung, and I could provide some sources on this. There's a really great book I found in Dallas about this, and I've read a couple of dissertations written on this that are excellent as well. Is that Jung really is a transcendental philosopher, and so maybe in the future that might be something fun for us to talk about too.
Oh, but Frank, please, man, I can't get enough. Yeah, I'm going through his collections now. So beautiful stuff.
Awesome.
I'm with you.
Awesome. No, yeah, love him. Love it. Really fun to read too. But so the idea is that transcendental philosophy and existentialism, what it allows you to do is it allows you to gain a focal point that is outside of binary opposition just to make it move fast, right? So the idea is that Kant referred to this as the transcendental unity of app perception. And so app perception is a term that Leibniz coined. He made up to refer to something that John Locke was talking about. But basically the idea is that app perception is AP and then the word perception. So you want to app perceive something is to perceive that you are perceiving. So when I'm looking at something, and then I'm also aware that I'm looking at it, right? And so then when we take that one step further, we can take it one step further, and we become aware of this sort of extra dimension, right? And the extra dimension is the transcendental piece. And so the idea is that the transcendental unity of app perception points to myself as I guess we could put a period there, right? It points to myself. It points to the self. But also, I think that one of the ways to understand this, especially if we're trying to not fall into subjectivity, right, is that it is in terms of a spiritual dimension. It's an extra dimension. It's yes. Spirituality. Yeah.
Wow. And now the deeper you get into this, because that what you're describing, something I deal since I do a lot of mindfulness meditation and these awareness. That's something interesting when you start noticing that you're noticing, right? And
yes.
It becomes
yes.
something that it's like almost irritating when I'm looking at my emotions, or I'm looking at my feelings. It's like, oh, I see it. And at this point, it's hard to let go of everything and see it. Now, how does this tie into that authentic self? Because is the perceiving of you perceiving the real self, or is this the perceiving yourself?
Excellent question. No, this is great. No, it's great. It's great. Yeah. So, so the idea is that the constitutional principles refer to that self that the transcendental unity of that perception is bringing into focus,
Mm.
right? And so those principles are, again, mystery, freedom, and mindness. And so what that means is that that self is mysterious, right? That self is mysterious because I don't have empirical access to it in the way that I have empirical access to the world, right? So I can reach out and I can touch. I can reach out and I can touch objects. I can touch, my body, and I can gain some kind of sensory awareness of my worldliness, my being in the world. But the transcendental unity of that perception is bringing into focus my being, right? And so once I'm able to look at my being in terms of this being in the world, right? Once I'm able to look at my being, then I'm able to start to recognize that being is mysterious, and also that being, that there's a freedom that is associated with being, and that there's also a mindness that is associated with being. So therefore, I am responsible for my own being, right? I am responsible for my own being in the world. So the idea is that once this starts to come into focus, then we move from the constitutional principles into the actualization principles. And so the actualization principles would be this sense in which how it is that I cope with the fact that being is in the world, right? And so the sort of, there's 7 principles, and that principle in the middle, it kind of bridges the 3 constitutional principles with the actualization principles, but I consider it constitutional in itself, and I think so does Heidegger, and so does Nietzsche, and so does Kierkegaard. And though that principle is anxiety or angst. And so the idea is that I become anxious by being in the world. I become anxious as I perceive myself perceiving, because I gain this higher awareness of myself,
Yes.
right? And that in itself is anxiety provoking. I think you could say just being in the world is anxiety provoking, but also this, as we, to use your term, as we increase in our enlightenment, and as we become more aware of our own being, and what it means to be, then this does sort of increase our anxiety. And so the idea is then that how we cope with that anxiety, and how we deal with being in the world, there are virtues to that. It is possible to cope with being in the world in a virtuous way. And so those virtues are the actualization principles, and those are integrity, authenticity, and sincerity. And oddly enough, those they correspond with so I'm really into, this is so much information, right, that I'm really into ways to remember this stuff more easily. And so it seems as though you can line up those integrity, authenticity, and sincerity with past, present, and future.
Wow.
So
Okay.
yeah.
Go deeper into that for me, Frank, because
Okay.
I'm just, you got me so, I'm just so into everything you're saying, man. You could just sit and just talk. So past, present, future. Yeah, of course.
So the idea is that, and borrowing a lot of Heidegger's being in time is very helpful here, to sort of organize the ideas that are already present in Kant and Kierkegaard, and really Kant and the German Romantics, Schelling and Schopenhauer, and Kierkegaard and Nietzsche before Heidegger. But so one of the things that we can recognize is that when we begin to have an awareness of this transcendental perception, right, that we begin to recognize that I exist in time, and there's this sense then that I am a being that is being in time. And so when I begin to recognize that it is possible to be consistent across time, then that's whenever I can begin to have this principle of integrity. And integrity, when we hear the word integrity from the psychological point of view, it should bring to mind integration, So the existential psychologists, of course, are always talking about the integration of the self. And so the idea is that when we're talking about integrity, is that when I am being in the world, I want to be in the world in a way that allows me to integrate my past and my present and my future being. So that's a kind of virtue. That's a kind of virtue of being in the world that we can refer to as integrity. So then once so we can see that especially in relation to the past, right? Because we can think about some sense in which the path that we've been walking and the choices that we have made have brought us to the point that we're at now. And how to navigate all of that past karma, how to navigate the path that we're on, is another way of saying how to integrate myself, how to reintegrate myself, right? The idea being that I'm thrown into the world, right? So the idea is that especially when you're a child, even though you have choices to make, there is some sense in which a lot of things are just sort of forced upon you, right? And so that in some way constitutes this being thrown into the world, right? Okay, and so then if I can do the future first too, and then we'll come back, and then
Yeah,
it's just
please.
all authenticity the rest of the way. But so sincerity, I fell in love with this concept of sincerity, and if I can just a really quick example. I love Zen Buddhism. I love reading these Buddhist monks. I love Suzuki's work in particular. I listen to it. Well, presently I'm not, but I feel like I was listening to Suzuki on headphones like all day long. I just was living alone and just listening to this stuff constantly. I'd listen to the Diamond Sutra, and anyway, but so love this stuff. But so one of the ways to characterize sincerity, and I feel like there are these critics out there who have said, well, sincerity is like a new age term, and so if anybody's using the word sincerity, then we just got to dismiss that and throw it out. But I think that that's a misunderstanding of what sincerity is, right? And so the way that these monks talk about sincerity is they say that, for example, if you're going to make a cup of tea, then just make a cup of tea. Right. So the idea is that if you're going to perform some action in the world, then you want to be sincere when you perform that action. You could almost refer to it as like a purity of heart. Kierkegaard is this Kierkegaard quote is purity of heart is to will one thing. Right. And so it's like if I'm going to be making a cup of tea right now, I'm going to make this cup of tea with all of my heart. I'm going to make this cup of tea with all of my mind. Right. And in that process, I will be sincerely making this cup of tea, right? And so I think that then how does this transfer over to the existentialism as a virtue or a principle of actualization? Is that when and it's oriented toward the future, Heidegger would refer to this as being toward death, right? And so to sincerely be and to sincerely be in the world is to recognize that I will die, right? It will recognize, it is to recognize and to be mindful that I only have so much time, right? And so if I only have so much time and I am doing what I am doing it sincerely whenever I am mindful of, this opportunity cost, when I am mindful of, I mean, and I don't know that I'm not trying to suggest that there's a right or wrong here. I'm not trying to say that you should make tea or that you should watch TV or that you should, play with your children or that you should go for a hike. I'm not saying that you should do any of those things. I'm just saying whatever it is that you are doing, you should be doing it sincerely.
Exactly. Yeah. And I guess to even take a more new age modern, you got to be mindful, you got to be present, you got to be conscious of doing it. And that's why I love, it's so funny because you're talking about death. I just finished Denial of Death last week. I'm in the middle of Lack and Transcendence by David Loy, which is kind of like it's like an epilogue after it of him going through it. And it's so interesting, the different, because like you're saying, there's no right or wrong to this, right? Because the way I'm understanding this, you tell me if I'm wrong, when you're reading a philosopher, it's good to understand Kierkegaard's view. It's good to understand Nietzsche's view. Because for me, the personal authenticity view of Nietzsche of saying, authenticity, authentic. And you could please tell me I'm wrong. Frank's the master.
Sure.
Personal authenticity can be achieved without a religion, and in living authentically, a person kind of elevates himself or herself above the mass culture in order to kind of transcend the limits of conventional morality. Am I close there, Frank?
I like that. I like that. So the way that I would try to enter into what you just said there is, the second quote that you read. Do you still have it present? Would
Yeah,
you be willing?
I
Would you
got
be
it.
willing? Okay.
Absolutely. That was the Gospel of Thomas, and it said, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you."
Beautiful. So one of the things that, and this took me, I mean, this took me a very, very long time to come to this, right? And tons and tons of work. And I always like to preface these things by saying, I always like to preface these things by saying stuff like, well, um, you know, if you want somebody to bake a cake, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not your guy. If you if you want somebody to like change your transmission in your car, I'm not your guy. You know what I mean? And there's are tons and tons of things that I am not good at, right? And there are tons of things that I have chosen not to pursue, right? In terms of this context of opportunity cost and so forth. But I have put so much time into philosophy. Sometimes now I think to myself like, oh well, especially because I'm outside of the university, that it's like, oh well, what was I thinking? You know what I mean? Like, there's so much more in the world to be doing other than philosophy. But of course, I can't stop. But I love it so much. But anyway, so the idea is that in terms of um, I mean, I'm trying to make sure I got the track of the question that you had asked again. So in terms of the um, the present and whether or not there's a right and a wrong, right? So I think that it is possible to use the terms right and wrong and possible to characterize those terms. It's fascinating that Heidegger, and this is directly in relation to authenticity, right? Heidegger says, I've got the quote in here. I'm not going to take the time to find it, but basically, I'd paraphrase it by saying that Heidegger says that it's not the case that authenticity is right and that inauthenticity is wrong. It's not the case, right? But then, other places he makes it so clear that authenticity is, and if we put this ethically, that authenticity is a better life, that authenticity is a good life, in like the old ancient Platonic and philosophical way of understanding the good life. So the point there being is that you can recognize this is okay. I've got the whole thread now. This is where I was at the very beginning of this, is that it took me a very long time to see this, but there is actually a spectrum. You can understand this in terms of a spectrum between mindness and like as in existence is mine, to do with what I will, mindness and worldliness. So there's a spectrum there, and so what you can see is that so let me put it in the other direction, that inauthenticity can be characterized as a falling into the world, right? And so and lots of people, and all of the existential philosophers characterize this in a kind of negative way. They characterize it in a way that would suggest as though it's wrong, and I can tell you why they would suggest in a second here. But so the idea is that to fall into worldliness, Heidegger would refer to this as to be carried along by the nobody, or to be carried along by the no one, to be carried along by the they. You could think of this, Nietzsche would refer to this as slave mentality. And Kierkegaard goes so far as to suggest that it is the demonic, that to fall into the world, to fall away from yourself. But when I say that, I really mean being, right? To fall away from being and too far into the world, whenever you find yourself as being in the world, is in a sense to become fragmented and to lose. I'm trying to find ways to connect it with everything else that we've been saying. Is that to lose control of your time, but more importantly than losing control of your time is to sort of lose touch with yourself. Yeah. So the idea is that I think that it's not, at the level of binary opposition, right? So it's not like if I eat this piece of pizza, am I being authentic or inauthentic? And is it right or is it wrong to eat this piece of pizza? I think you could say it is right or it is wrong to eat the piece of pizza. I mean, I don't know, you got a food allergy or something, whatever, whatever the case. Maybe you stole the piece of pizza from somebody. Maybe you shouldn't eat it. It's wrong to eat somebody else's piece of pizza. I don't know, but in terms of is it authentic or is it inauthentic? That question is really a question of how you occupy the present moment.
Now, because this is something I've dealt with being a kid from Brooklyn, Italian, got to get the girls, got to get the money, all that good stuff that I would say is more like a mass culture society norm compared to like individuality.
Mhm.
Is that what we're talking about here? Being like unique in what you truly want to do against, because I don't even know why I did half the shit I did in my 20s. I was just doing it because that's what other people were doing. It's like you're almost walking through unconsciously.
Sure. So great question, Scott. Great question. Gabriel Marcel characterizes this in terms of wholeness and totality. And I think so. Whereas totality kind of refers to integrity and this idea of being able to integrate yourself across time. Wholeness refers to this idea of authenticity. And when I am being in the world, am I wholly myself, or am I somehow being carried along by the world? Am I somehow being carried along by the nobody?
Yes.
And so I think to answer your question directly, it's like, well, if you're being influenced by culture, and if there's the question is are you losing yourself um, in the flow of that culture? Are you losing yourself in the flow of the world, or are you able to um, be yourself despite being in the world? Are you able to maintain your wholeness, um, as opposed to um, falling too far into whatever that may be? So in terms of culture, so one of the ways that you can think about this is that is the like acting or being some kind of character, right?
Exactly.
And so I feel like if you are being some kind of character and you are making choices based on the momentum of being that character, um, without being mindful of the integrity across time, without being sincere when you're making those choices, without authentically being yourself, without being in terms of wholeness in the moment when you're being that character, then I would say that's what inauthenticity looks like. To just be making choices or trying to avoid making these choices because it's the momentum of, for example, like peer pressure, or just the momentum of like I feel as though I'm expected by others to do this, and so therefore I'm going to do it, without sort of owning it. I think that those are all ways to think about inauthenticity. Yeah, but if I can just say something here though that I think that is important, is that that we talk about this idea that it's just so easy to apply a morality to authenticity, but I think that authenticity is the condition for the possibility of being in morality. So the idea is that um, it is it is the ground of um, being moral, especially in insofar as we want to say that a person can make a choice, right? If you're just being carried along, then there's some sense in which you're not actually making the choices, and then we can actually ask the question of, is that, what kind of an ethics is that anyway? And forgive me, one other thought here, is that yeah. So um, when I was teaching this, when I was teaching this in Dallas, a student brought up a point to me that I thought was an excellent point, and this idea that that mindfulness training. His point, Greg was his name. Shout out to Greg.
Shout out
What a
to
wonderful.
Greg.
Yeah, what a wonderful guy Greg is and was. But so Greg made some point that really the point of mindfulness and the point of this authenticity and integrity and sincerity, although we weren't using those words at the time, we were just sort of talking about mindfulness, was that he said, this is so that the samurai can kill more efficiently. Right. So the idea was that this is so that, like, if I'm entering into some life or death situation, that my mind isn't paying attention to other things, right? That my mind is paying attention to the one task that is at hand here. And I think that that's correct. Right. And
Yeah.
so I bring up this point because it is to say that it can be applied to any morality. I think that so the idea is that it is the condition for the possibility of being inside of a kind of culture or being inside of a kind of morality. Like if you are somebody who goes to protests because you think that it's the cool thing to do, right? Or if you're going to protests because because everybody else is doing it or something like that, then I would say that you're not authentically protesting, right? That kind of it's that kind of mode, that kind of engagement, that mode of engagement.
Gotcha. Yeah, because for me, when I started getting into this, I started looking really at, like, what do I value? And I feel like for me at this part of my life, my values are almost opposite of that of society, of some parts of society, and kind of being strong enough to stand your ground and stand alone almost, and just be original enough to kind of initiate these opposite values. I feel like it's hard. It's a hard thing to do. And I think as we go through this, you're gonna need these kind of skill sets. To first, like we said, be aware, and then to act on them. There's like two pieces to this puzzle here that just kind of, and I got a lot of kids, a lot of our audience, or shout out to all the young dudes listening, 18, 24 guys who they're not philosophical guys, but there's philosophy in all of us. We have to kind of bring this up to the forefront here. And that's why I'm so glad that you joined me, dude.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, man. Of course. You know what? We'll cut it here, Frank. You gotta come on. For another. Let's do another one. I want to do another episode. Frank's coming back. You can find all of Frank's notes in all the where to find him and all his contact info, the notes below. That's it, Frank. Anything you want to plug? Anything coming up?
Well, like I said, so the YouTube channel is called Philosophemes, or the Philosophemes channel. In fact, here, if I can, let me
pop that up.
Toss up. Yeah, let's pop this up here real quick. And then I'll also plug the podcast. So here is, let's see if we can. Oh, this has got to be. There we go. So that's what it looks like. This is the YouTube channel. Let me see if. Give me a second here. Real quick. I just want to show you the one slide I put together.
Yeah, please.
So, in regard to, so here's the self-actualization piece. Of course, this is Maslow, but these are the constitutional principles, and then here are the actualization principles and the way that they line up with time. And so if anybody's interested in checking out that, what is existentialism book, this is just an easier way to remember. But if anybody's interested in checking out that existentialism book, this is some of the information that they're going to find in there. But so let me get back to the full screen here. And so then the podcast is called Basic Philosophical Questions. And I'm still putting together some of the episodes for that. So that should be out soon. Basic Philosophical Questions. And then, like I said, the Philosophemes channel is technically already up. I'm hoping to start posting things maybe even this weekend.
Oh, beautiful. Let's go, Frank. Yeah. So by the time I was hearing this is going to be about a couple days after. So hopefully I'm going to put the gun to Frank. Frank, it's up. It's got to be up. That's it, man.
Awesome.
Frank, thank you so much. Come back next month. Let's do another topic.
Okay.
Sounds
That'd be great. That'd be great. I really appreciate it, Scott. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you.
Yeah.
YouTube people, you're hearing us fourth or fifth. Frank's the fourth or fifth guy with his nice background. Ring that button up there. Tell one of your friends about it. As always, stay safe, stay positive, stay blessed. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.